Have you ever felt the bone-chilling mists rolling across the Yorkshire moors? Heard the phantom hounds baying through the ancient forests of Sherwood? These sounds echo across millennia, carrying with them whispers of forgotten curses, creatures that stalk the boundary between myth and reality, and pagan spirits that predate the very stones of Saxon churches. Welcome to England, where folklore is not mere fairy tale, but ancestral memory etched into the very soil beneath our feet. And tonight, we shall venture into the fog-shrouded realm of Old England, where every village harbors dark secrets, every forest conceals hungry phantoms, and every crossroads resonates with the footsteps of the damned. Prepare yourselves, for this night, we shall pierce the veil of respectability to explore 7 Gothic legends that have haunted the English people since time, from the leaping devil of Victorian London to the spectral hounds of Norfolk, from the horned god of Windsor to the ancient worm of Derry. These are not tales spun for children's entertainment. They are collective nightmares that reveal truths about the price of progress and the shadows that linger beneath civilization's veneer. If you, like me, feel drawn to the darkness that dwells in England's forgotten corners, subscribe to our channel and activate notifications. Leave in the comments which of these legends chilled you most. And now, let our journey through the shadows of Albion begin. Springheed Jack, the leaping devil of Victorian London. Listen carefully, for I shall tell you of a creature that terrorized the greatest city in the world during its most confident age. In the gaslit streets of Victorian London, where progress marched triumphant and science promised to banish all superstition, there stalked a being that defied every rational explanation. Springheed Jack, the leaping devil, who could bound over buildings, breathe blue flames, and strike terror into the hearts of those who believed the modern world had conquered all ancient fears. Picture London in 1837, the year young Victoria ascended the throne. The city sprawled like a living organism, fed by the Industrial Revolution's dark satanic mills. Steam engines belched smoke into fog-thick air, while gas lamps cast wavering pools of yellow light that seemed to make the shadows dance with malevolent life. It was here, in this urban labyrinth, where wealth and poverty existed in shocking proximity, that Jack first made his presence known. The creature appeared as a tall, thin figure dressed in a tight-fitting garment that gleamed like oiled leather or polished metal. His most distinctive features were his eyes burning like red coals in a blacksmith's forge, and his hands, encased in metallic claws, capable of tearing through the heaviest winter coat. Witnesses described his ability to leap impossible distances, bounding from rooftop to rooftop with inhuman ease, or springing directly over carriages and their terrified occupants. But it was Jack's cruel intelligence that made him truly terrifying. Unlike a mindless beast, he seemed to take perverse pleasure in psychological torment. He would appear suddenly before lone travelers, particularly young women, breathing blue flames from his mouth while uttering otherworldly shrieks that could be heard streets away. Then, before his victims could even scream, he would bound away into the darkness, leaving them traumatized, but physically unharmed. The legend began with Lucy Scales, a 13-year-old girl walking home through Green Dragon Alley in October 1837. According to her testimony to the Lambay Street Police, a figure in a dark cloak leaped from the shadows, breathing blue flame directly into her face before bounding away with supernatural agility. Lucy was found hours later, her hair singed, her clothes torn, babbling about a devil with eyes like fire. What followed was a reign of terror that gripped London for decades. Jack seemed to appear wherever fear was strongest, in the narrow alleys of Whitechapel, the fog-shrouded commons of Blackheath, the respectable squares of Kensington, where he delighted in terrorizing the very citizens who felt most secure in their modern prosperity. The most famous encounter occurred in February 1838, when Genola answered a frantic knocking at her family's door in Bear Bend Lane. A man claiming to be a police officer gasped that they had caught Springing in the lane and needed a light to secure the prisoner. When Jane emerged with a candle, the supposed officer threw off his cloak, revealing the burning eyes and metallic claws of Jack himself. He breathed flames at the girl, tearing her dress and hair with his talons before her screams brought her family running. As they approached, Jack bounded away with a triumphant laugh, leaping clear over a 9-foot wall as icily as stepping over a puddle. The authorities, embarrassed by their inability to capture what the press dubbed the Terror of London, dismissed the reports as mass hysteria or elaborate hoaxes. But the sightings continued, spreading beyond the capital to the countryside. In 1845, Jack appeared in Norwich, terrifying a local carpenter named Jacob Smith by leaping over his cottage while breathing blue flames. In 1867, he materialized in Liverpool, causing several soldiers to open fire, their bullets passing harmlessly through what should have been solid flesh. Perhaps most disturbing was Jack's apparent immortality. Witnesses who encountered him in 1870 described the same youthful athletic figure that had terrorized London in the 1830s. He showed no signs of aging, no diminishment of his supernatural abilities, as if time itself could not touch whatever dark force animated his form. The Victorian era's attempt to explain Jack through scientific rationality only deepened the mystery. Some theorized he was an inventor testing springs and mechanical devices, explaining his jumping ability through technology rather than supernatural power. Others suggested an eccentric nobleman playing elaborate pranks using primitive gas apparatus to create the flame-breathing effect. But these explanations crumbled when confronted with eyewitness accounts of Jack leaping impossible distances or surviving direct gunshots. The truth whispered among those who remembered the old ways was far more disturbing. Spring-heeled Jack represented the return of something ancient and primal, a spirit of chaos and mischief that had been driven underground by the rise of Christian civilization, but never truly destroyed. In the urban sprawl of Victorian London, where traditional communities had been shattered by industrialization and millions lived as strangers to one another, the old protections no longer held. Jack embodied the shadow side of progress, the price paid for abandoning the sacred bonds that had once connected human communities to the land and to each other. His flames were not mere parlor tricks, but the fires of judgment, revealing the spiritual emptiness beneath Victorian prosperity. His leaps defied not just gravity, but the very materialism that claimed to have mapped and measured all reality. The last confirmed sighting of Spring Jack occurred in 1904 at Everton, where he appeared to a group of children playing in the street. True to form, he breathed blue flames, uttered his characteristic shriek, and bounded away over the rooftops. But perhaps his disappearance was not defeat, but strategic withdrawal. In a world increasingly dominated by electric lights and motor cars, the shadows, where Jack thrived, were growing fewer. Yet the legend persists, adapted to modern fears. Urban explorers report strange encounters in abandoned London underground tunnels. Security cameras occasionally capture figures moving with impossible speed and agility across rooftops. Some claim Jack has evolved, trading his Victorian garb for modern materials while retaining his supernatural abilities. Jack reminds us that no matter how advanced our civilization becomes, we cannot completely escape the forces that lurk beyond the reach of reason. In our cities of glass and steel, we may feel ourselves masters of the natural world, but the old spirits wait patiently for moments when our confidence wavers, when the lights fail, when we remember that some mysteries refuse to be solved by technology alone. The next time you walk alone through city streets at night, pay attention to the sounds echoing between buildings, the scrape of metal on stone, the whisper of something moving just beyond your vision. Most likely, it's merely the urban landscape settling into darkness. But sometimes, just sometimes, it might be Jack himself, still leaping through the night, still breathing his blue flames, still reminding us that the modern world has not conquered all the ancient fears that dwell in the human heart. Black Shark, the phantom hound of East Anglia. From the marshlands of Norfolk to the wind-swept coasts of Suffolk comes a legend that strikes terror into the hearts of even the bravest souls. Black Shark, the phantom hound, whose eyes burn like coals from hell's own furnace, whose very sight brings death to those unlucky enough to meet his gaze. This is no ordinary ghost story, but an encounter with something far older and more terrible than human memory can contain. Picture the desolate fens of East Anglia, where mist rises from black water and ancient churches stand like stone sentinels against the encroaching darkness. Here in this landscape that seems suspended between the world of the living and the realm of the dead, stalks a creature that has haunted the local population for over 1,000 years. Black Shark is not merely a spectral dog, but a harbinger of doom, a guardian of boundaries that should not be crossed, and a reminder that some territories belong to powers far older than human civilization. The beast appears as a massive hound, larger than any earthly dog, its fur so black that it seems to absorb light rather than reflect it. Its eyes burn with an inner fire that witnesses describe as red as fresh blood or green as marsh gas, depending on the moon's phase and the observer's fate. Some report that Shuck has only one eye blazing in the center of his forehead, like a demonic cyclops. Others claim he has two eyes that can look into a person's soul and judge the weight of their sins. The creature's size varies according to the tales. Sometimes he appears merely large, like a mastiff or wolfhound, but in moments of great supernatural manifestation, witnesses describe a beast the size of a horse with breath that steams even on warm summer nights, and paws that leave burning prints in the earth. His howl carries 4 miles across the flat fenlands, a sound so mournful and terrible that it can drive strong men to madness and cause pregnant women to miscarry from sheer terror. The most famous encounter with Black Shuck occurred on August 4, 1577, during a thunderstorm that raged across Suffolk with supernatural fury. The parishioners of St. Mary's Church in Bang had gathered for morning service, seeking comfort from the tempest that seemed to shake the very foundations of their stone sanctuary. As the Reverend Abraham Fleming delivered his sermon, lightning split the sky with such violence that the church bells rang without human hand touching them. Suddenly, the great oak doors of the church burst open, though no earthly wind could have moved them against the iron bars that held them secure. Through the doorway bounded Black Shuck, his massive form wreathed in sulphurous smoke, his eyes blazing with unholy fire. The congregation froze in terror as the phantom hound stalked down the aisle, his claws clicking against the ancient stones with sounds like breaking bones. 2 men knelt in prayer near the altar. Thomas Rabbit, a farmer, known for his kindness to the poor, and William Dowsing, a merchant whose dealings were often questioned by his neighbors. As Shake approached, his blazing gaze fell upon each man in turn. Rabbit, looking up to see the beast bearing down upon him, clasped his hands tighter in prayer and whispered words of faith. The hound paused, tilted his massive head, and passed by without harm. But when those terrible eyes fixed upon Dowsing, the merchant's face went white with terror. He tried to run, but Shuck was upon him in an instant. With one touch of his burning paw, Dowsing crumpled to the stone floor, his body withered and blackened as if struck by lightning. As the phantom hound continued his passage through the church, he brushed against a young boy named Geoffrey Flint. The child survived but bore the mark of Shuck's touch for the rest of his days. His hair turned white as snow, and his left hand remained blackened and numb until his death 60 years later. Having delivered his judgment, Black Shuck bounded toward the bell tower. As he leapt through the air, his supernatural form passed directly through the stone wall, leaving behind scorch marks that can still be seen today. The force of his passage caused the church bells to crack, their bronze frames twisted into shapes that resembled screaming faces. The steeple itself was damaged with stones falling to create a hole that local masons declared structurally impossible. The Reverend Fleming documented this encounter in meticulous detail, his account preserved in the church records. This black dog, or the devil in such a likeness, running all along down the body of the church, with great swiftness and incredible haste, among the people in a visible form and shape, passed between 2 persons, as they were kneeling upon their knees and occupied in prayer, as it seemed, wrung the necks of them both, in one instant, clean backward, insomuch that even at a moment where they kneeled, they strangely died. But Bang was not Shuck's only target that terrible morning. 7 miles away at St. Andrew's Church in Blythburgh, the phantom hound appeared during the same storm. Here, his manifestation was even more terrible. As the congregation cowed in their pews, Shuck bounded through the church, his claws leaving deep gouges in the ancient wooden door, marks that visitors can still see today, known locally as the Devil's Fingerprints. At Blythburgh, the hound's rampage was more extensive. He killed 2 more parishioners and injured several others, his burning touch leaving them scarred for life. The church's clock tower was struck by what witnesses described as supernatural lightning, though skeptics noted that no natural electrical storm could have caused the specific pattern of damage. Stones fused together in impossible configurations, metal twisted into occult symbols, and scorch marks that formed patterns resembling ancient runic inscriptions. The legend of Black Shuck extends far beyond these documented encounters. Throughout East Anglia, families pass down stories of the Phantom Hound's appearances during times of great change or impending doom. He was seen prowling the battlefields of the English Civil War, his howls announcing which side would suffer defeat. Fishermen report encounters with Shuck along the Norfolk coast, where his appearance warns of storms that could claim entire fleets. During World War II, several FROF pilots reported seeing a massive black dog running alongside their aircraft during dangerous missions over Nazi-occupied territory. Those who witnessed Shuck and returned safely spoke of feeling protected, as if the ancient guardian had chosen to shield them from harm. But bombers that encountered the Phantom Hound and showed fear or doubt in their mission often failed to return, their crews joining the countless sores that Shuck has claimed over the centuries. The psychological impact of Shuck encounters extends beyond mere superstition. Witnesses describe a profound alteration in their perception of reality, as if meeting the Phantom Hound tears away the comfortable illusions that separate the mundane world from the supernatural realm. Many report developing an uncanny ability to sense impending death or disaster, a gift that comes with the terrible burden of knowing when tragedy approaches, but being powerless to prevent it. Modern researchers attempting to explain Black Shuck through rational means have proposed various theories. Some suggest the legend originated from sightings of actual large black dogs, perhaps escaped mastiffs, or even wolves during the medieval period when such creatures still roamed English forests. Others point to meteorological phenomena, arguing that ball, lightning, or other atmospheric disturbances could create the illusion of a supernatural creature during severe storms. But these explanations crumble when confronted with the consistency of witness accounts across centuries and the physical evidence left behind. The claw marks at Bleeburg Church have been examined by modern forensic experts, who confirm that no known animal could have created gouges of such depth and distinctive pattern. The scorch marks at Bang similarly defy conventional explanation, showing signs of intense heat application that no 16th century technology could have produced. The truth preserved in the folk memory of East Anglian families reveals Black Shuck's deeper significance. He is a psychop, a guardian spirit, who serves as both judge and executioner for those who violate the ancient laws that govern the relationship between the human and natural worlds. His appearances mark moments when the veil between life and death grows thin, when cosmic justice demands settling of accounts that earthly law cannot address. Shuck's role as a supernatural judge explains why his encounters seem to follow moral rather than random patterns. Those who meet him with clear consciences and pure hearts often find protection rather than punishment, but those who carry the weight of unconfessed sins or unrepented cruelty discover that Shuck's burning gaze can peer directly into their souls and find them wanting. The Phantom Hound also serves as a guardian of sacred spaces and ancient boundaries. Many of his appearances occur near prehistoric sites, stone circles, burial mounds, ancient crossroads where ley lines intersect. In these locations, Shuck patrols the borders between the material and spiritual worlds, ensuring that certain thresholds remain protected from those who would exploit supernatural forces for personal gain. Environmental changes in East Anglia have altered but not eliminated Shuck's domain, as marshlands have been drained and ancient forests cleared for agriculture. His appearances have shifted to new locations, abandoned airfields, industrial sites built on sacred ground, motorways that cut through prehistoric landscapes. Modern Shuck encounters often occur near these disrupted sacred sites, as if the Phantom Hound continues his eternal vigil. Despite humanity's attempts to reshape the landscape, the legend persists in contemporary East Anglia, adapted to modern circumstances but retaining its essential power. Dog walkers report encounters with an impossibly large black dog that appears suddenly on lonely footpaths, regards them with burning eyes, then vanishes without leaving tracks. Drivers on isolated country roads describe a massive hound that races alongside their vehicles for miles before disappearing into the darkness. These modern sightings often precede significant events, deaths in local families, natural disasters, or community tragedies. Shuck's role as harbinger has evolved, but not diminished, his supernatural awareness encompassing threats unknown to his medieval manifestations. Some witnesses report that his burning eyes now reflect not just the fires of judgment, but the glow of electronic devices, as if the ancient guardian has adapted to monitor humanity's newest sources of spiritual corruption. Black Shuck reminds us that no matter how thoroughly we believe we have mapped and mastered the English countryside, Ancient powers still patrol territories that predate human occupation. The phantom hound represents the persistence of natural law in a world increasingly divorced from natural consequence, a reminder that some boundaries cannot be crossed without facing judgment from forces that recognize no human authority. Tonight, as fog rolls across the East Anglian fence and mist rises from black water, listen carefully for the sound of heavy paws on ancient pathways. Pay attention to shadows that move independently of their sources, two eyes that gleam in darkness where no creature should be. For Black Shake still runs his eternal patrol, still judges the souls of those who encounter him, still guards the sacred boundaries between the world we know and the mysteries that lie beyond human understanding. Herne the Hunter, the horned god of Windsor Forest. In the ancient heart of Windsor Forest, where oak trees older than memory cast shadows that have witnessed the rise and fall of kingdoms, stalks a figure that embodies England's deepest and most primal fears. Herne the Hunter, the horned phantom who rides eternal through the night, leading his ghostly pack in a hunt that seeks not mere deer or boar, but souls that have forgotten their connection to the wild places of the earth. Picture Windsor Great Park as it existed centuries before it became the manicured playground of royalty. Here was a forest primeval where massive oaks formed cathedral arches of living wood, where streams ran clear and cold from springs touched by prehistoric magic, where the boundary between the human world and the realm of the old gods remained permeable to those who knew the proper rituals and offerings. Herne appears as a towering figure, his human form crowned with the magnificent antlers of a great stag. His face bears the weathered features of one who has dwelt in wild places since time began. Skin like bark, eyes that hold the depths of forest pools, hair and beard woven with moss and trailing ivy. He is neither fully man nor beast, but something older than either, a manifestation of the forest's own consciousness, given terrible form. The hunter's body shows the scars of countless ages, wounds from iron weapons that mark humanity's war against the wild, burns from fires that have cleared ancient groves, gouges where metal machines have torn through sacred soil. Yet these marks of civilization's advance only seem to strengthen rather than diminish his supernatural power, as if each violation of the natural order adds to the fury that drives his eternal hunt. Herne's most terrifying aspect is his pack. Not earthly hounds, but spectral beasts with eyes like burning coals, and breath that steams with otherworldly cold. These phantom hunters follow their master through dimensions invisible to mortal sight, passing through solid matter as easily as through morning mist, their supernatural howls echoing across both the physical landscape and the dreams of those who sleep within miles of their passing. The legend crystallized during the reign of Richard II, when Windsor Forest served as the king's private hunting preserve. Sir Philip Mowbray, the royal master of hounds, prided himself on knowing every deer path and hidden glade in the vast woodland. A man of Norman blood who viewed the English countryside as territory to be conquered rather than sacred space to be honored. Mowbray dismissed the warnings of local foresters about certain groves that should remain undisturbed. On the Feast of Samhain in 1391, as October's dying light filtered through autumn leaves turned red as blood, Mowbray organized a hunt that would prove his mastery over Windsor Forest once and for all. He had identified a massive white stag, a creature of such size and majesty that capturing it would cement his reputation as the greatest hunter in England. Local peasants whispered that the white stag was sacred, a messenger from the other world that must not be harmed. But Mowbray scorned such superstition as peasant foolishness. The hunt began at dawn, with Mowbray leading a party of noble guests through the forest's familiar paths. But as they pursued the white stag deeper into the woodland, the very landscape seemed to shift around them. Paths they had followed for years led to clearings that should not exist. Streams flowed uphill, defying natural law. The sun's position in the sky bore no relation to the passage of time, as if they had entered a realm where earthly physics held no sway. As evening approached, though whether this was the same day they had begun their hunt, or some other day entirely, none could say, the party found themselves in a grove none recognized, despite their intimate knowledge of the forest. Here stood oaks so ancient that their trunks could have housed entire families, their canopies so thick that stars seemed to hang from their branches like fruit. In the center of this impossible grove stood the white stag, but now it was transformed. Its antlers had grown into a crown of living light. Its eyes burned with intelligence that spoke of wisdom accumulated over millennia. and around its neck hung garlands of flowers that bloomed and withered and bloomed again in endless cycles of death and rebirth. As Moba raised his crossbow, the stag spoke in a voice like wind through ancient leaves. "Norman interloper, do you believe your mettle and your arrogance can claim what was sacred before your people ever set foot on this island? This forest has guardians older than your Christ, protectors who remember when your ancestors cowered in continental caves while the old gods walked openly in England's green valleys." But Mowbray's pride would not let him acknowledge what his eyes were seeing. He loosed his bolt directly at the stag's heart, confident that his skill would end this supernatural challenge. The crossbow bolt struck true, but instead of felling the creature, it passed harmlessly through its form, as if striking mist. The stag laughed, a sound like silver bells mixed with the roar of winter storms. "So be it, Hunter. You have chosen to ignore the ancient laws, to claim dominion over forces that shape this land, before humanity learned to walk upright. Then learn what it means to be prey rather than predator, to be hunted rather than hunter." The transformation began with agony beyond human comprehension. Moba felt his skull cracking as bone began to sprout from his forehead, growing into the branching antlers that would mark him forever as Herne the Hunterer. His human clothing dissolved like smoke, replaced by garments woven from shadows and moonlight. His noble companions fled in terror as their leader's screams echoed through the forest. But the trees themselves seemed to bend inward, trapping them in the grove until the change was complete. When dawn finally came, and witnesses disagreed whether this was hours or years later, the hunting party emerged from Windsor forests forever changed. They spoke in whispers of a terrible figure crowned with antlers who had appeared at the moment of Mowbray's transformation. This entity, calling itself the Forest Father, had pronounced a curse that would bind the arrogant hunter to an eternal existence as guardian of the very wildlands he had sought to dominate. Herne's punishment was to hunt forever, but never to catch his prey. He was doomed to pursue the souls of those who violated the natural order, leading them in a chase that could last for centuries, showing them the consequences of treating the earth as mere property to be exploited. Most terrible of all, he retained his human consciousness, forever aware of what he had lost through his prideful refusal to acknowledge powers greater than human ambition. The first reports of Herne's supernatural hunts came within months of Mowbray's disappearance. Foresters working in Windsor's depths reported hearing the sound of hunting horns echoing through the night, followed by the baying of hounds that seemed to come from every direction at once. Those brave enough to investigate discovered hoofprints burned into the earth, forming patterns that hurt the eyes to look upon directly. King Richard himself encountered Herne during a midnight ride through the forest in 1394. According to the royal chronicles, the phantom hunter appeared on the path ahead of the king's party, his antler head visible above the mist that cloaked his lower body. Plantagenet. Plantagenet, Her spoke in a voice like wind through dead leaves. "Your Norman blood has ruled this land for 3 centuries, but the forest remembers older kings. Rule justly, or join my eternal Hund." Richard, perhaps wiser than his master of hounds had been, dismounted and approached the spectral figure with appropriate humility. He acknowledged the ancient rights of the forest, promised to establish laws protecting the sacred groves, and commissioned the creation of sanctuaries where the old ways could continue undisturbed. In return, Herne granted him safe passage and protection from his enemies, though this protection would prove limited as political forces beyond even the hunter's power eventually cost Richard his throne and life. Throughout the centuries that followed, Herne's appearances marked moments of crisis in English history. He was seen riding through Windsor Forest on the night before the Battle of Agincourt, his phantom pack howling in celebration of the victory that would come. During the English Civil War, both royalist and parliamentary forces reported encounters with the horned hunter, who seemed to judge their causes based on their treatment of the common people and the land itself. Charles I, in the days before his execution, claimed to have met Herne during a final walk through Windsor's grounds. The phantom hunter allegedly told the doomed king that royal blood meant nothing to powers older than any human crown, but that a king who had forgotten his duty to protect both people and land deserved whatever fate awaited him. When the executioner's axe fell, witnesses reported hearing the distant sound of hunting horns echoing from the direction of the forest. The Victorian era brought new challenges to Herne's guardianship, as industrialization began to encroach on England's wild places. Reports from this period describe the hunter's appearances as more urgent, more terrible than in previous centuries. Railway workers cutting through ancient woodlands, spoke of a horned figure who would appear on the tracks ahead of their trains, forcing them to halt while his spectral pack crossed their path. Those who ignored his warnings often found their engines mysteriously failing or their tracks somehow misaligned, causing delays that prevented the destruction of particularly sacred sites. Modern encounters with Hearn have adapted to contemporary threats while retaining their essential character. Environmental activists report seeing him during protests against development in ancient forests, his presence lending strength to their efforts and sometimes causing machinery to malfunction at crucial moments. Urban explorers venturing into the remaining fragments of Windsor's original woodland describe feeling watched by unseen eyes and hearing the distant sound of horns echoing through the night. The psychological impact of encountering Hearn extends far beyond mere supernatural terror. Witnesses describe a profound shift in their understanding of humanity's relationship with the natural world. Many report developing an acute sensitivity to environmental damage, as if the hunter's presence has awakened in them the same awareness that drives his eternal vigilance. Some become lifelong conservationists, dedicating their lives to protecting the wild places they now understand as sacred rather than merely scenic. The phenomenon of Hearn's hunt serves as a powerful metaphor for the consequences of treating nature as commodity rather than community. His eternal pursuit of those who violate natural law represents the unconscious guilt that haunts a civilization built on the systematic exploitation of the Earth's resources. In psychological terms, the hunter embodies the return of the repressed, the primal connection to wildness that industrial society has attempted to eliminate but can never fully destroy. Archaeological evidence supports the legend's ancient roots. Excavations in Windsor Forest have uncovered artifacts suggesting continuous ritual use of certain groves, spanning millennia. Stone circles predating Stonehenge, ritual deposits of antlers and bones, cave paintings showing horned figures leading hunts, all point to a tradition of forest worship that Christianity co-opted but never completely. The horned god archetype that Eerie represents appears in cultures worldwide, suggesting something more than local superstition. Cernunnos of the Celts, Pan of the Greeks, the Green Man of medieval Christianity, all embody the same essential force that manifests in English folklore. This cross-cultural consistency implies that the hunter represents not mere mythological creation, but contact with an actual non-human intelligence that different cultures have interpreted through their own symbolic frameworks. Climate change has brought new urgency to Hearn's appearances. Forest rangers and conservation workers report increased sightings during periods of extreme weather or environmental stress. Some describe feeling the hunter's presence during wildfires as if his ancient power works to protect what remains of England's original woodlands. Others report encounters during tree planting efforts, suggesting that Hearn's role has evolved from pure vengeance to include active guardianship of restoration projects. The legend of Hearn the Hunter serves as both warning and invitation. It warns that treating the natural world as mere resource for human exploitation carries consequences that extend beyond material calculation into realms of spiritual accounting. But it also invites recognition that wildness remains alive in the world, that powers older than civilization continue to influence events in ways that rational materialism cannot acknowledge. Modern visitors to Windsor Great Park sometimes report strange experiences while walking the ancient paths, shadows that move independently of their sources, the sound of hoofbeats on paths where no horses are permitted, the glimpse of antlers among the branches where no deer should be. Most dismiss these experiences as imagination or optical illusion, but if you understand that they have briefly glimpsed something far older and more significant than themselves. Tonight, as you consider your own relationship with the natural world, remember that Hearn's hunt continues. The hunter's vigilance extends beyond the boundaries of Windsor Forest to encompass all wild places under threat. All ancient groves marked for destruction, all watersheds poisoned by industrial excess. His phantom pack runs not just through English woodlands, but through the collective unconscious of a species that has forgotten its place in the web of life. Listen for the sound of hunting horns echoing through the darkness. Feel the weight of ancient eyes watching from shadows between the trees. And remember that some hunts are not pursuit of quarry, but pursuit of justice, that some hunters serve not human masters, but laws older than civilization itself. For Hearn, the hunter rides eternal, crown of antlers, catching starlight, leading his pack in search of souls that need reminding of their connection to the wild heart that beats beneath all human pretense. The lantern worm, the worm of the river, where from the rolling hills of County Durham, where the river carves its ancient path through stone and memory, comes a tale of such horror that parents still use it to frighten disobedient children into obedience. The Lambton worm, a serpent so massive and malevolent that it could coil itself 7 times around Penner Hill, represents the terrible price of arrogance and the catastrophic consequences of disturbing forces that should remain forever buried beneath the earth. Picture the Lamp estate in the 14th century, where the river flowed clear and sweet, past meadows where cattle grazed in peaceful ignorance of the horrors that would soon darken their pastures. Here stood Lambton Castle, home to a family whose Norman blood had made them masters of all they surveyed since the conquest. But mastery over the land does not guarantee mastery over the ancient powers that sleep beneath it, as young John Lambton would learn to his eternal sorrow. The tale begins on a Sunday morning in 1420, when all God-fearing folk were gathered in the village church for morning prayers. But John Lambton, heir to vast estates and countless serfs, chose to spend his Sabbath fishing in the river rather than honoring his Christian duties. This was no mere youthful rebellion, but a deliberate act of sacrilege, a conscious choice to place personal pleasure above divine commandment, as the young lord cast his line into the sacred waters. For all running water was considered holy in the old traditions that predated Christianity. He felt an immediate and powerful strike. But what he pulled from the depths was no ordinary fish. The creature writhing on his hook was black as pitch, with eyes like burning coals, and a mouth filled with teeth sharp enough to cut through steel. It was no longer than a man's arm, but its malevolent intelligence was immediately apparent in the way it fixed its gaze upon John's face, and seemed to smile with anticipation of future revenge. Local peasants, emerging from morning service, gathered to stare at the unnatural catch. Old Margaret Whitton, whose family had lived beside the weir since Saxon times, crossed herself and whispered, "Young master, throw that devil back where it belongs. No good can come of pulling such things from the holy water on the Lord's Day." But John Lambton, drunk on the arrogance of youth and station, only laughed at such peasant superstition. "This worm shall serve as decoration for my chamber," he declared, "a trophy of my angling skill to amuse my guests." Against all advice, and ignoring the growing crowd of terrified villagers, he carried his prize to a disused well behind the castle stables and dropped it into the murky depths. For 7 years, John forgot about his catch as he departed for the Crusades, seeking glory and absolution in the Holy Land. But the worm did not forget about John. Fed by the dark waters of the well, and sustained by forces older than human memory, it grew at a rate that defied natural law. By the time news of its existence reached the outside world, the creature had become a serpent of such enormous proportions that its very presence contaminated the countryside for miles around. The beast that emerged from the well bore little resemblance to the small creature John had caught. Now it stretched nearly 60 feet in length, its body thick as a castle tower, covered in scales that no weapon could penetrate. Its head had grown into something between serpent and dragon, with jaws capable of swallowing a grown man whole, and eyes that burned with infernal fire. Most terrible of all were its supernatural abilities. It could regenerate any wound within hours. Its breath could poison entire villages, and its very touch could turn fertile soil into barren wasteland. The Lambton worm established its lair by coiling itself around Penshaw Hill, a location of ancient significance where prehistoric peoples had once conducted sacred rituals. From this position, it could survey the entire valley while drawing power from the ley lines that intersected beneath the hill's summit. 7 times it wrapped its massive body around the hill, 7 being a number of completion in the old magical traditions, claiming the entire landscape as its domain. The creature's appetite proved as enormous as its size. Each day at dawn, it would uncoil from Penshire Hill and prowl the countryside, devouring everything in its path. Cattle, sheep, and horses vanished wholesale, swallowed alive to feed the worm's unnatural growth. But livestock was merely an appetizer for the monster's true preference: human flesh, particularly the flesh of children whose innocence had not yet been corrupted by adult sins. Entire villages were abandoned as the worms' hunting range expanded. Those who remained tried every form of protection known to their ancestors. They hung iron horseshoes over doorways, scattered salt in sacred circles, burned rohan wood and veined to create barriers against evil. But the lampworm had grown beyond the power of such simple charms to contain. The local priest, Father Benedict Harrowing, organized the evacuation of threatened settlements while attempting various forms of Christian exorcism, but his holy water boiled away at the creature's approach. His crucifixes cracked and crumbled, and his prayers were drowned out by the worm's supernatural roaring. The monsters seemed to draw strength from each failed attempt to destroy it, as if feeding on the despair of those who sought divine intervention. Military solution proved equally futile. Sir Geoffrey Middleton led a force of 50 men-at-arms against the beast, armed with the finest weapons that 15th century metallurgy could provide. The worm received their attack with what could only be described as amusement, allowing them to hack at its scales, while regenerating any damage faster than they could inflict it. When the creature finally grew bored with this one-sided battle, it consumed the entire force in less than an hour, leaving only Sir Geoff's sword as evidence that they had ever existed. The psychological impact of the worm's presence extended far beyond its immediate hunting range. Reports filtered in from neighboring counties of supernatural phenomena, wells turning to blood, livestock giving birth to monstrous offspring, and children speaking in languages that predated human civilization. The creature's malevolent influence seemed to radiate outward like ripples from a stone dropped in still water, corrupting everything it touched. After 7 years of terrorizing the countryside, the worm's reign of horror was finally ended by John Lambton's return from the Crusades. The young lord, who had departed in arrogant ignorance, returned as a hardened warrior, marked by battles against supernatural enemies in the Holy Land. But more importantly, he returned with knowledge of the old ways gleaned from Arab sorcerers and Byzantine mystics, who remembered magical traditions older than Christianity. John's first act upon learning of the catastrophe his youthful folly had unleashed was to seek out the wise woman of Fatfield, a legendary figure whose knowledge of arcane law was whispered about throughout northern England. She lived in a cottage built on the foundation of a prehistoric stone circle, surrounded by gardens where herbs grew in patterns that hurt the eyes to look upon directly. The wise woman, ancient beyond measure, yet possessing eyes that sparkled with eternal youth, listened to John's confession without surprise or judgment. "Young lord," she spoke in a voice like wind through autumn leaves, "you pulled death from sacred waters and fed it with your negligence. Now death has grown large enough to devour everything you claim to love. There is a way to destroy what you have created, but the price will be higher than you imagine." The ritual she prescribed combined elements of Christian faith with pagan magic far older than any church. John's armor must be covered with spear points, every inch of metal transformed into a weapon that could pierce the worm's scales. He must confront the beast at dawn on the anniversary of its emergence, when the boundary between worlds grew thin, and supernatural creatures were most vulnerable to mortal weapons. But the most terrible requirement was the blood price. After slaying the worm, John must kill the first living creature he encountered, offering its life to balance the cosmic scales disrupted by his original sin. If he failed in this, the wise woman warned, a curse would fall upon the Lambton bloodline. For 9 generations, no Lord of Lamp would die peacefully in his bed. The final battle took place at dawn, on a morning when fog rose from the riverware like the breath of sleeping giants. John, his armor bristling with razor-sharp spear points, took position on the bridge where the ancient road crossed the sacred waters. As the first light of sunrise touched Penshaw Hill, the lampworm uncoiled from its lair and came to meet its creator in single combat. The fight that followed transcended ordinary warfare, becoming a contest between forces of creation and destruction that had shaped the world since its beginning. Each time the worm's massive coils wrapped around John's armored form. The spear points, covering his body, sliced through the creature's flesh like knives through silk. The beast's supernatural regeneration, which had made it invincible against conventional weapons, became its weakness. For each healing required energy, and the constant wounds inflicted by John's spiked armor drained its strength faster than it could replenish. But the worm's death throes nearly destroyed everything within miles. Its blood spilling into the riverware turned the sacred waters black for months afterward. Its final roar shattered windows in Durham Cathedral, 20 miles distant, and knocked birds from the sky across 3 counties. When the creature finally lay still, its massive body began to dissolve into a corruption so foul that the very stones of the bridge was stained permanently black. The moment of victory became the moment of tragedy, for John's father, hearing the sounds of battle from the castle, had rushed to assist his son. The old lord arrived, just as the worm breathed its last, becoming the first living creature John encountered after his triumph. Bound by the wise woman's decree, John was forced to draw his sword against the man who had given him life, completing the blood ritual that would save the land from further supernatural contamination. But the curse fell upon the lamb line nonetheless, for John's heart broke with his father's death, and broken hearts cannot maintain the spiritual strength necessary to ward off supernatural retribution. For 9 generations, every Lord of Lamp met a violent end in battle, by assassination, through hunting accidents, or by suicide when the weight of the family curse became unbearable. The legend of the Lambton worm has persisted through 6 centuries, not merely as entertainment, but as warning about the consequences of treating sacred things as common, of assuming human mastery over forces beyond human comprehension. The worm represents the return of the repressed, the ancient powers that technological civilization tries to ignore but can never permanently suppress. Modern visitors to County Durham can still see evidence of the worm's passage. The well where Jean first placed his cat remains, though it has been sealed with stones and blessed by generations of priests. Penshore Hill bears indentations that local geologists cannot explain through natural processes, but which perfectly match the legend's description of the worm's coils. The river Wear, despite centuries of flow, still shows traces of unnatural discoloration in certain stretches where the creature's blood once poisoned the sacred waters. Environmental scientists studying the area have documented unusual phenomena that correlate with the legend's details. Soil samples from Penner Hill show mineral compositions that should not exist in that geographic region. Fish populations in the River Wear display genetic anomalies that suggest exposure to unknown mutagenic factors in their ancestry. Underground water sources near Lambton Castle contain trace elements that match no known geological formations. The psychological impact of the legend extends beyond historical curiosity into contemporary environmental consciousness. The lampworm serves as a perfect metaphor for ecological disaster, a small, seemingly insignificant transgression against natural law that grows into catastrophe threatening entire ecosystems. John's fishing expedition becomes every act of environmental recklessness. His casual disposal of an unnatural catch becomes every instance of improper waste disposal, and the resulting monster becomes climate change, pollution, or any of the other environmental crises that now threaten global civilization. The curse upon the Lamp bloodline reflects the way environmental damage creates ongoing consequences that affect future generations. Just as each Lord of Lamp paid for his ancestors' arrogance, each human generation inherits the environmental debts accumulated by their predecessors. The worm's regenerative abilities mirror the way environmental problems tend to grow stronger when attacked with inadequate solutions, requiring comprehensive approaches that address root causes rather than surface symptoms. Modern encounters with supernatural phenomena in the L area often follow patterns established by the original legend. Hikers on Penor Hill report seeing massive serpentine forms moving through the morning mist, though these vanish when approached directly. Anglers in the River Wear occasionally catch fish with unusual characteristics: extra fins, unusual coloration, or eyes that seem to hold malevolent intelligence, though these specimens mysteriously disappear if taken home. The well behind Lambton Castle, despite being sealed for centuries, sometimes produces sounds that locals describe as something large moving deep underground. Seismic equipment placed in the area by curious researchers has recorded rhythmic vibrations that match no known geological phenomena, but correspond perfectly to the breathing patterns of a very large serpent. These contemporary manifestations suggest that the lantern worm's destruction was not absolute, but merely reduced it to a dormant state. Local folklore maintains that the creature will return when environmental destruction reaches a critical threshold, emerging from its underground lair to claim vengeance for humanity's continued abuse of the natural world. The legend reminds us that our actions have consequences extending far beyond our ability to predict or control them. John Lambton's moment of casual sacrilege created a monster that terrorized an entire region for 7 years, required supernatural intervention to destroy, and left a curse that affected his family for 9 generations. In our current age of global environmental crisis, the story serves as both warning and guide. Warning about the exponential growth of problems that begin with seemingly minor violations of natural law, and guidance about the price that must be paid to restore balance once that law has been broken. Tonight, as you consider your own relationship with the sacred waters of the earth, remember that every river remembers what has been thrown into its depths. Every well holds, not just water, but the accumulated intentions of all who have drawn from its source. And somewhere beneath Penshore Hill, coiled in patient darkness, something ancient waits for the signal that the time of reckoning has come again. For the lantern worm represents not just a historical monster, but an eternal principle, that power without responsibility creates destruction, that arrogance toward natural forces generates consequences that can consume everything we claim to love. Mother Shipton, the prophetess of in the limestone caves of Yorkshire, where the River Need carves its ancient path through stone older than human memory, was born a child whose very existence challenged every assumption about the boundary between natural and supernatural power. Mother Shipton, England's most famous prophetess, whose visions of future catastrophes proved so accurate that her name became synonymous with doom itself. But behind the legend of the wise woman who could see through time lies a darker truth. The story of a creature whose very birth announced the coming of an age when ancient magic would war against emerging rational thought. Picture Nesper. In 1488, a town perched on limestone cliffs, where traders and pilgrims paused to marvel at the petrifying well, a natural wonder that could turn organic matter to stone through mysterious mineral processes. Here in a cave that locals whispered was older than Christianity lived Agatha South, a young woman whose beauty was matched only by her reputation for consorting with forces that proper folk avoided. The circumstances of Ursula South's birth were so unnatural that they established her legendary status before she drew her first breath. According to the testimony of the midwife, Agatha's labor pains began during a thunderstorm so violent that it seemed to shake the very foundations of the earth. Lightning struck repeatedly in the same spot, creating a pattern that burned occult symbols into the ground around the cave. As the child emerged, witnesses reported that the temperature dropped so suddenly that water froze yet the air filled with a sulphurous odor, as if hell itself had opened to receive the newborn. But the most unsettling aspect of Ursula's birth was her appearance. The infant bore physical deformities so pronounced that they suggested supernatural rather than natural causes. Her back was severely hunched, her limbs twisted into unnatural angles, and her face possessed features that seemed almost reptilian. Most disturbing of all were her eyes, described by those brave enough to look directly at them as ancient beyond measure, holding knowledge that no infant should possess. The midwife, Margaret Steele, documented these supernatural manifestations in a journal that survived until the Great Fire of Canesborough in 1658. She wrote, "The child Ursulae came into this world, marked by forces beyond mortal understanding. Though newly born, she gazed upon us with eyes that held the weight of centuries. When she cried, the sound echoed through the cave-like voices from another world, and every candle in the chamber guttered as if blown by an unholy wind." From her earliest years, Ursula displayed abilities that marked her as something far beyond ordinary human experience. She spoke her first words at 3 months of age, not in the babbling syllables of normal infants, but in complete sentences that prophesied events that would not occur for months or years. Local mothers brought their sick children to the cave for the strange infant's touch could heal ailments that defeated the most skilled physicians. But healing was merely one aspect of Ursula's supernatural gifts. As she grew, her ability to perceive future events developed into something approaching she could see through time as easily as looking through a window, witnessing wars that would not begin for decades, technologies that would not be invented for centuries, and catastrophes that lay hidden in humanity's distant future. At the age of 7, Ursula delivered her first major prophecy, speaking in rhyming couplets that would become the standard form for her predictions. Before a gathering of local nobles who had come to test her alleged powers, she spoke of King Richard III's death at Bosworth Field, an event that would not occur for 3 years, and which no rational observer could have predicted. She described the Tudor rose that would replace the Plantagenet crown named Henry Tudor as the future king, and warned of religious upheavals that would tear England apart in the coming century. The accuracy of these predictions established Ursula's reputation throughout northern England. Pilgrims journeyed from across the realm to seek her counsel, bringing offerings of gold and silver that she invariably refused. Accepting only simple gifts of food or clothing for the poor, she established herself in the cave by the petrifying well, using its supernatural properties to create demonstrations that convinced skeptics of her otherworldly connections. But Mother Shipton's prophecies were rarely comforting. She specialized in predicting disasters, conflicts, and catastrophic changes that would transform the familiar world into something alien and terrible. Her visions of the future painted a picture of humanity, driven by forces beyond its control toward destinations that promised suffering rather than glory. Her most famous prediction concerned Cardinal Wolsey, Henry VIII's powerful chancellor, who seemed at the height of his influence when Shipton delivered her pronouncement. In 1530, when Wolsey was traveling north to York to take up his position as archbishop, local nobles arranged for him to visit the prophetess, whose reputation had reached even the royal court. Wolsey approached the encounter with the confidence of a man who wielded power second only to the king himself. But Mother Shipton, now in her 40s and bearing the physical marks of decades spent channeling supernatural forces, regarded the cardinal with eyes that seemed to peer directly into his soul. "Your grace travels north to take possession of a place you shall see, but never occupy," she intoned in the sing-song voice that marked her prophetic utterances. "The earth will open to receive you before you can set foot in your cathedral." Wolsey, accustomed to the flattery of courtiers and the deference of subjects, responded with anger rather than attention. He threatened to have the prophetess burned as a witch if her prediction proved false, then continued his journey northward with increased determination to prove her wrong. But Mother Shipton had seen true. Wolsey died at Leicester Abbey on his way to York, never reaching the cathedral where he was to be installed. His body was buried hastily in an unmarked grave, fulfilling her prediction that the earth would receive him before he could claim his intended position. This success enhanced Mother Shipton's reputation for accuracy, but it also demonstrated the terrible burden of her gift. She could perceive future events with perfect clarity, but she was powerless to prevent them. Her prophecies served as warnings that were invariably ignored by those who most needed to heed them, creating a tragic cycle where foreknowledge became a source of frustration rather than empowerment. The psychological toll of constantly witnessing future disasters transformed Mother Shipton from the relatively normal child she had been into something increasingly removed from ordinary human experience. Visitors to her cave described an atmosphere of otherworldly detachment, as if the prophetess existed simultaneously in multiple time periods and could barely maintain focus on the present moment. Her prophecies during this period revealed events that would not occur for centuries, demonstrating a supernatural awareness that transcended any possibility of rational deduction. She predicted the Great Fire of London in 1666, describing flames that would consume the ancient city and leave it transformed. She foresaw the civil war that would divide England in the 17th century, naming Charles I as a king who would lose his head for placing royal will above divine law. Most remarkably, Mother Shipton's visions extended into the modern era with accuracy that continues to astound contemporary readers. She predicted the invention of iron ships that would sail without wind, carriages that would move without horses, and flying machines that would carry people through the sky. Her description of global communication networks anticipated both telephone and internet technologies with uncanny precision. "In water, iron then shall float," she prophesied, "as easy as a wooden boat. Gold shall be found and shown in land that's now not known." These lines accurately predicted both the development of iron ships and the discovery of gold in America and Australia, continents unknown to European knowledge in her lifetime. Perhaps most disturbing were her predictions about environmental catastrophe and global conflict. She foresaw wars that would span entire continents, weapons that could destroy cities in moments, and environmental changes that would make vast areas of the earth uninhabitable. Her visions of the future suggested that humanity's technological advancement would create problems far more dangerous than any faced by medieval society. The accuracy of Mother Shipton's long-term predictions raises profound questions about the nature of time and consciousness. Either she possessed genuine supernatural ability to perceive future events, or she had access to information sources that conventional history cannot explain. The detailed specificity of her prophecies, combined with their consistent accuracy across centuries, makes simple guesswork or coincidence statistically impossible. Modern researchers studying Mother Shipton's predictions have identified patterns suggesting access to what might be called a temporal overview, an ability to perceive human history as a completed narrative rather than an unfolding sequence of events. This perspective would explain both the accuracy of her specific predictions and the generally pessimistic tone of her visions, since an observer viewing history from outside temporal sequence would see the total accumulation of human suffering rather than experiencing the hope that sustains people living within time's flow. The cave where Mother Shipton lived and delivered her prophecies has become a site of ongoing supernatural activity. Visitors report experiencing temporal displacement, where they witness scenes from different historical periods overlapping in the same physical space. The petrifying well continues to operate according to principles that modern geology cannot fully explain, turning organic matter to stone through processes that seem to accelerate natural mineralization by thousands of years. Recent investigations using electromagnetic sensing equipment have detected unusual energy patterns in the cave that correlate with recorded instances of prophetic activity. These readings suggest the presence of some form of temporal distortion that might explain both Mother Shipton's abilities and the ongoing supernatural phenomena reported by contemporary visitors. The environmental implications of Mother Shipton's prophecies have gained new relevance as her predictions about climate change and ecological disaster prove increasingly accurate. Her warnings about seas of glass and lands that sink beneath the wave now read like descriptions of rising sea levels and coastal flooding. Her visions of air that burns and water turned to stone suggest environmental pollution on a scale that 16th century society could not have imagined. The psychological impact of studying Mother Shipton's prophecies extends beyond historical curiosity into existential questions about human agency and free will. If future events can be perceived with the accuracy demonstrated by her predictions, what does this suggest about the possibility of changing or avoiding negative outcomes? Her own experience suggests that foreknowledge creates responsibility without providing power, the terrible burden of seeing disasters approaching while being unable to prevent them. Contemporary reports of prophetic experiences in the Nesborough area often follow patterns established by Mother Shipton's original manifestations. Visitors to the cave occasionally experience spontaneous visions of future events, though these are typically brief and fragmentary compared to the sustained supernatural awareness that marked the original prophetess. Some researchers suggest that the cave itself retains some form of temporal permeability that can temporarily enhance human consciousness beyond its normal limitations. The legend of Mother Shipton serves as both historical curiosity and contemporary warning. Her prophecies remind us that the future is not an empty slate waiting to be written, but a destination we are approaching through decisions made in the present. Her visions of technological advancement, coupled with environmental destruction and social chaos, offer a roadmap of possibilities that current events seem determined to fulfill. The accuracy of her predictions also raises disturbing questions about the nature of human progress. If a 16th century prophetess could foresee the major developments of the next 5 centuries, including their negative consequences, what does this suggest about humanity's ability to learn from experience and choose wiser paths? Her prophecies imply a pattern of development that seems almost inevitable, as if human civilization follows trajectories that are visible to supernatural perception, even when they remain hidden from ordinary awareness. Modern environmental activists and social critics often quote Mother Shipton's prophecies about the consequences of unchecked technological development and environmental exploitation. Her warnings about the price of treating nature as commodity rather than sacred trust resonate with contemporary concerns about climate change, pollution, and the loss of biodiversity. In this context, she serves not just as historical figure, but as voice from the past, warning about futures that current choices are making increasingly likely. Tonight, as you consider the trajectory of human civilization and your own place within historical forces larger than individual control, remember that Mother Shipton's cave still echoes with visions of possible futures. The petrifying well continues its mysterious work, transforming organic matter into stone as a reminder that some changes once begun cannot be reversed. And somewhere in the limestone depths, where the prophetess once dwelt, The future continues to cast its shadow backward through time, waiting for those with eyes to see, and wisdom to understand that prophecy is not entertainment, but warning, not curiosity, but called to consciousness about the choices that shape tomorrow's world. Wayland the Smith, the vengeful craftsman of the White Horse, high on the wind-swept downs of Berkshire, where ancient chalk figures cut into hillsides. Speak of peoples whose names have been forgotten by history, stands a monument older than any church in England. Wayland's smithy, a Neolithic long barrow that predates Stonehenge, marks the legendary forge of a god whose divine craft was matched only by his capacity for terrible vengeance. Here dwells Wayland the Smith, master of metal and fire, whose supernatural abilities could create wonders beyond human imagination, or instruments of destruction that could unmake kingdoms. Picture the Berkshire Downs as they existed 5,000 years ago, when the chalk grasslands stretched unbroken to every horizon, and the White Horse of Uffington had already been watching over the sacred landscape for centuries beyond counting. Here where ley lines converge, and the earth itself holds memory of rituals conducted when humanity was young, the gods still walked openly among mortals, and the boundary between divine and human realms remained permeable to those who knew the proper invocations. Wayland appears in legend as a figure of impossible contradictions. Divine smith capable of crafting artifacts that could reshape reality itself, yet bound by supernatural laws that made him slave to any mortal clever enough to exploit his cosmic obligations. He possessed the physical perfection of a god combined with the emotional vulnerabilities of mortal men, creating a being whose tremendous power was constantly at war with passionate desires that could lead to catastrophic vengeance. The smith's forge, built into the ancient burial mound that still bears his name, operated according to principles that transcended ordinary metal. Here, Wayland could work metals that existed only in the realm of pure possibility, creating swords that could cut through any material, armor that could turn aside any weapon, and artifacts imbued with supernatural properties that made their bearers temporarily godlike in their abilities. But one's greatest creations were not weapons or armor, but works of art so beautiful that they challenged the very foundations of reality. Jewelry that captured starlight in solid form, musical instruments whose melodies could heal mortal wounds or drive listeners to divine madness, and mechanical creatures that possessed consciousness indistinguishable from life itself. These masterworks demonstrated that true craftsmanship operates not just on material levels, but on spiritual dimensions, where beauty becomes a force capable of transforming consciousness. The legend that established Wayland's reputation for supernatural vengeance began with King Nidard of Sweden, a mortal ruler whose greed overcame his wisdom when he learned of the divine smith's existence. Driven by lust for artifacts that could make him the most powerful king in the known world, Nidard devised a plan to capture Wayland and force him to work exclusively for the Swedish crown. The king's soldiers struck while Wayland was sleeping, binding him with chains forged from meteoric iron and blessed by priests of the old religion. These bonds were proof against supernatural strength, but not against supernatural cunning, and Wayland allowed himself to be captured while already planning a revenge that would demonstrate the terrible price of treating divine beings as mortal slaves. Nidard transported his prisoner to an island forge where escape would be impossible, then set him to work creating treasures for the royal household. For months, Wayland labored with apparent submission, crafting crowns embedded with gems that held captured sunlight, swords whose edges never dulled, and golden ornaments of such exquisite beauty that they seemed to sing with their own celestial music. But the divine smith was secretly crafting instruments of vengeance alongside these royal commissions. Working with materials invisible to mortal perception, he forged tools that existed partially outside normal space, artifacts that could manipulate reality itself, rather than merely cutting or shaping physical matter. Each piece he completed brought him closer to the moment when he would repay Nidard's arrogance with interest that would echo through generations. The opportunity for revenge came when Nidard's two sons, Prince Slagfitter and Agile, visited the island forge to commission personnel weapons. Wayland received them with apparent humility, offering to create for each prince a sword that would make him invincible in battle. He requested only that they return alone the following day to receive their completed weapons, as the final enchantments required privacy to complete successfully. When the princes arrived for their appointment, Wayland was ready with vengeance that would demonstrate the difference between mortal cruelty and divine justice. Using tools forged from supernatural metals, he killed both young men with such surgical precision that their souls were severed from their bodies, while leaving their physical forms intact. He then used their corpses as raw materials for artifacts that would serve as permanent reminders of the price of enslaving gods. From Slagfitter's skull, Wayland crafted a drinking cup, whose silver surface was inlaid with patterns that told the story of the prince's death in detail so precise that anyone examining it closely would witness the murder as if they had been present. From Iga's bones, he created a musical instrument whose haunting melodies could drive listeners to madness or ecstasy, depending on the smith's intention. Most terrible of all, he extracted their eyes and transformed them into gemstones of such beauty that they seemed to hold the light of distant stars, though closer examination revealed that the light came from the trapped souls of their former owners. When King Nidad arrived to collect his sons, Wayland presented these artifacts as gifts, honoring the royal visit. The king, unaware that he was drinking from his child's skull and listening to music created from another child's bones, praised the smith's artistry while unknowingly participating in a supernatural ritual that would bind him to the consequences of his original crime. But Juan's masterpiece of vengeance was yet to come. Bervilda, Nedad's daughter, had often visited the forge to watch the divine craftsman work. Fascinated by abilities that transcended anything she had witnessed in the mortal world, Wayland, recognizing both her innocence and her potential as an instrument of justice, crafted for her a ring of such transcendent beauty that it seemed to contain the essence of perfect love itself. When Bervilda placed the ring upon her finger, she became bound to Wayland through supernatural laws older than human civilization. Their union, conducted according to divine rather than mortal customs, produced a child who would carry both human and godlike qualities. Vidger, who would grow to become the greatest hero of his generation while serving as living reminder of the consequences of his grandfather's crimes. With his revenge complete and his divine honor restored, Wayland revealed the true nature of his gifts to the horrified king. Ned had learned that he had been drinking from his son's skull, listening to music created from his other son's bones, and that his daughter now carried the child of the god he had presumed to enslave. But the most terrible revelation was that these acts of vengeance were not random cruelty, but cosmic justice, demonstrating the inevitable consequences of treating divine beings as property, to be owned and exploited. Juan's escape from the island forge demonstrated the futility of mortal attempts to constrain divine power. Using wings crafted from supernatural materials and his own divine essence, he rose into the sky while pronouncing a curse that would follow Nedard's bloodline for 7 generations. Every descendant would be marked by the king's original crime, suffering defeats and disasters that would serve as ongoing reminders that some boundaries must never be crossed. The legend of Juan's revenge spread throughout northern Europe, serving as both entertainment and warning about the consequences of exploiting supernatural forces. But the deeper truth encoded in the story reveals principles of cosmic justice that remain relevant regardless of technological advancement or cultural change. Wayland represents the archetypal artist whose creative power cannot be separated from their personal autonomy, whose greatest works emerge from freedom rather than compulsion. The supernatural craftsmanship attributed to Wayland reflects ancient understanding of creation as spiritual rather than merely physical activity. In traditional cultures, smiths occupied positions of enormous respect because their ability to transform raw materials into useful objects was seen as participation in divine creative power. The forge became a sacred space where physical and spiritual transformation occurred simultaneously, where the smith's consciousness shaped reality as much as hammer and anvil shaped metal. With his revenge complete and his divine honor restored, Wayland revealed the true nature of his gifts to the horrified king. Nid had learned that he had been drinking from his son's skull, listening to music created from his other son's bones, and that his daughter now carried the child of the god he had presumed to enslave. But the most terrible revelation was that these acts of vengeance were not random cruelty, but cosmic justice, demonstrating the inevitable consequences of treating divine beings as property to be owned and exploited. One's escape from the island forge demonstrated the futility of mortal attempts to constrain divine power, using wings crafted from supernatural materials and his own divine essence. He rose into the sky while pronouncing a curse that would follow Nedard's bloodline for 7 generations. Every descendant would be marked by the king's original crime, suffering defeats and disasters that would serve as ongoing reminders that some boundaries must never be crossed. The legend of Juan's revenge spread throughout northern Europe, serving as both entertainment and warning about the consequences of exploiting supernatural forces. But the deeper truth encoded in the story reveals principles of cosmic justice that remain relevant regardless of technological advancement or cultural change. Wayland represents the archetypal artist, whose creative power cannot be separated from their personal autonomy, whose greatest works emerge from freedom rather than compulsion. The supernatural craftsmanship attributed to Wayland reflects ancient understanding of creation as spiritual rather than merely physical activity. In traditional cultures, smiths occupied positions of enormous respect because their ability to transform raw materials into useful objects was seen as participation in divine creative power. The forge became a sacred space where physical and spiritual transformation occurred simultaneously, where the smith's consciousness shaped reality as much as hammer and anvil shaped metal. Archaeological evidence suggests that the Wayland smithy site was indeed associated with metalwork activities spanning thousands of years. Excavations have uncovered evidence of ritualized deposition of metalwork, suggesting that the location served as a sacred space where supernatural forces were invoked to enhance human craftsmanship. The Neolithic burial chamber that forms the monument's core was constructed with astronomical alignments that demonstrate sophisticated understanding of celestial mechanics, implying connections between earthly craft and cosmic order. Modern visitors to one smithy often report experiences that echo the legendary accounts of supernatural craftsmanship. Metalworkers and craftspeople describe feeling inspired to attempt projects beyond their normal skill levels while in the vicinity of the ancient monument. Some report finding unusual materials, metals with properties that shouldn't exist according to conventional metallurgy, or tools that seem to work with supernatural efficiency when used for specific purposes. The psychological impact of engaging with Juan's legend extends beyond historical curiosity into questions about the relationship between creativity and autonomy. The story suggests that authentic artistic expression cannot be separated from personal freedom, that the greatest works emerge from inspiration rather than compulsion. This principle applies not just to traditional crafts, but to any creative endeavor where external pressure threatens to compromise artistic integrity. Contemporary environmental and social movements often in Juan's example when discussing the consequences of treating natural resources or human labor as commodities to be exploited, rather than sacred trusts to be honored. His revenge against need becomes a metaphor for the inevitable consequences of systems that prioritize short-term gain over long-term sustainability, that treat creative beings as production units rather than recognizing their inherent dignity and autonomy. The legend also serves as warning about the hidden costs of supernatural assistance. One's gifts to those who approach him with proper respect are transformative, but his vengeance against those who attempt exploitation demonstrates that divine power operates according to moral laws that cannot be circumvented through clever contracts or superior force. The king's attempt to enslave a god resulted in consequences that affected his entire bloodline, suggesting that some crimes create karmic debts that extend far beyond the original perpetrator. Modern neo-pagan practitioners often make pilgrimages to Juan's smithy, seeking inspiration for their own creative work or guidance in developing spiritual connections to traditional crafts. These contemporary encounters frequently follow patterns established in the ancient legends. Offerings left at the site disappear mysteriously. Unusual materials appear in nearby locations and crafts. People report experiencing enhanced abilities for projects begun during their visits. The phenomenon of one's gifts continues to manifest in ways adapted to contemporary technology and social structures. Computer programmers working on open-source projects sometimes experience breakthrough insights after visiting the ancient forge. Artists struggling with creative blocks report sudden resolution of technical problems that had seemed insurmountable. Musicians describe hearing melodies in the wind that crosses the downs, compositions that seem to emerge from the landscape itself rather than human imagination. These modern manifestations suggest that the principles embodied by Juan's legend remain active in contemporary reality. The divine smith represents the archetypal creative force that operates beyond human control, but can be accessed through proper respect and understanding. His forge becomes a metaphor for any space where physical and spiritual transformation occurs simultaneously, where consciousness shapes reality as much as technique shapes materials. The curse aspect of Wan's legend also manifests in contemporary contexts where creative beings are exploited or constrained by systems that prioritize profit over artistic integrity, corporations that treat employees as expendable resources, educational institutions that stifle rather than nurture creative development, and social structures that discourage authentic expression, all triggering responses that mirror one's supernatural vengeance, not through literal magic, but through the inevitable consequences of systems that violate fundamental principles of creative autonomy. Tonight, as you consider your own relationship with creative power and the forces that either support or constrain authentic expression, remember that Wan's forge still burns in sacred spaces where transformation occurs. The ancient smithy stands as a reminder that some forms of power cannot be owned or controlled, only honored and respected. Whether you work with metal or words, pixels or paints, the Divine Smith's example teaches that the greatest creations emerge from freedom rather than compulsion, from inspiration rather than exploitation. Listen for the ring of hammer and anvil echoing across the downs. Feel the heat that rises from forges, both ancient and eternal. And remember that somewhere on the Berkshire Hills, where chalk horses race across timeless grasslands, Wayland continues his work, crafting artifacts that exist at the intersection of physical and spiritual reality, teaching the hard lesson that creativity cannot be separated from consciousness, that authentic art emerges only when the artist remains free to honor both vision and conscience. Merlin the Enchanter, the last magician of Britain. From the mist-shrouded hills of Wales to the standing stones of Cornwall, across landscapes where ancient magic still pulses beneath the veneer of Christian civilization, echoes the most complex and contradictory figure in British legend. Merlin the Enchanter, wizard of Camelot, advisor to kings, prophet of Britain's destiny. Yet also something far darker and more dangerous than courtly romance suggests. Behind the familiar tales of Arthur's mentor lies the story of a being caught between two worlds, serving as bridge between the dying age of magic and the rising age of mortal ambition, witnessing the inevitable corruption of every ideal he sought to preserve. Picture Britain in the 6th century, when the Roman legions had withdrawn, but their roads still carried travelers through forests, where older powers than Caesar had ever claimed dominion. Here, in this landscape suspended between classical antiquity and medieval darkness, the last practitioners of ancient wisdom struggled to preserve knowledge that Christianity sought to either co-opt or destroy. It was into this world of transition and conflict that Merlin emerged. Not born, but manifested according to the deepest traditions, as the offspring of mortal woman and otherworldly intelligence. The circumstances of Merlin's origin established his fundamental nature as a being who belonged fully to neither human nor supernatural realms. His mother, Carathan of Dype, was renowned throughout Wales for her beauty and her stubborn refusal to accept the Christian faith despite royal pressure to abandon the old ways. Her pregnancy occurred without any mortal father, conceived during ritual communion with forces that preceded human civilization by eons. The child who emerged from this supernatural union bore little resemblance to ordinary mortals. From birth, Merlin possessed the physical appearance of extreme age, combined with eyes that held depths of knowledge accumulated across geological rather than human time spans. He spoke his first words not in infant babbling, but in complete sentences that prophesied events centuries in the future, his voice carrying harmonics that resonated with frequencies beyond normal human hearing. But perhaps most disturbing was Merlin's emotional detachment from human concerns. Unlike other supernatural beings who displayed exaggerated versions of mortal passions, the young wizard seemed to exist in a state of cosmic perspective that made individual human lives appear as brief as mayfly existence. This detachment would prove both his greatest strength and his ultimate tragedy, allowing him to manipulate events across centuries, while preventing him from forming the emotional connections that might have anchored him to humanity. Merlin's education occurred not in any earthly institution, but through direct communion with intelligences that existed beyond the physical plane. The stone circles of Britain served as his classrooms, where prehistoric alignments focused cosmic energies that could expand consciousness beyond mortal limitations. Here he learned to perceive time as a dimension that could be navigated rather than simply endured, developing the prophetic abilities that would make him indispensable to rulers seeking to understand their destinies. His mastery of magic transcended mere spellcasting to encompass fundamental manipulation of reality's operating principles. Merlin could command the elements not through supernatural coercion, but through understanding of the mathematical relationships that govern natural phenomena. His illusions were not deceptions, but temporary alterations of physical law that made impossible things briefly possible. Most impressively, he could perceive the quantum probability streams that determine future events, allowing him to guide reality toward desired outcomes through subtle interventions at crucial decision points. The wizard's first appearance in recorded history occurred during the reign of Vortigern, the British king, whose alliance with Saxon mercenaries threatened to fragment post-Roman Britain into competing tribal territories. Vortigern had attempted to build a fortress on Mount Snowdon, but the structure mysteriously collapsed each night despite the skill of his builders. Court magicians suggested that the foundation required sacrifice of a child born without mortal father, leading to Merlin's capture and intended execution. But when brought before the king, Merlin demonstrated powers that transcended anything Vortigern's advisors had imagined possible. Instead of pleading for his life, the young wizard revealed the true cause of the fortress's instability: an underground lake where two dragons, one red and one white, fought eternal battle for dominion over Britain's future. Through supernatural perception, he guided the king's workers to uncover this hidden conflict, proving his prophetic abilities while delivering the first of his famous predictions about Saxon conquest and eventual native British resurgence. The dragons themselves were not mere beasts, but embodiment of competing historical forces, the red dragon representing the Celtic people's connection to the land's ancient powers, the white dragon symbolizing the Saxon invaders' pragmatic materialism. Their underground battle reflected the cosmic struggle between magical and rational, worldviews that would define Britain's transition from prehistoric to medieval civilization. Merlin's involvement with Arthur represented both the pinnacle of his earthly influence and the beginning of his ultimate disillusionment with human nature. He engineered Arthur's conception through magical manipulation that enabled Uther Pendragon to assume the appearance of Duke Gorwa, thus ensuring that the future king would carry both royal bloodline and supernatural heritage. This intervention required Merlin to violate his usual principle of non-inference, marking the beginning of his direct engagement with political events that would ultimately corrupt his cosmic perspective. The wizard's role as Arthur's mentor reflected his attempts to create a ruler who could bridge the gap between ancient wisdom and necessary governance. He designed Camelot not merely as royal capital, but as magical working space, where ancient knowledge could be preserved. While adapting to Christian civilization's requirements, the Round Table operated according to principles of sacred geometry that focused supernatural energies on the task of maintaining justice and harmony throughout Arthur's realm. But Merlin's greatest creation was also his most dangerous experiment. Excalibur, the sword he crafted for Arthur, was not simply a superior weapon, but an artifact that connected its bearer to the archetypal forces that governed kingship itself. The blade could cut through any material because it was forged from crystallized will rather than earthly metal. Its scabbard granted invulnerability because it existed partially outside normal space. Together, they made Arthur temporarily godlike in his authority, while binding him to cosmic responsibilities that no mortal could fully comprehend. The psychological toll of wielding such power gradually corrupted both Arthur and his knights. Despite Merlin's careful instruction in the spiritual disciplines necessary to handle supernatural authority responsibly, the wizard watched with growing horror as idealistic young warriors became obsessed with their own reputations. As noble quests degenerated into competitions for personal glory, as the Round's fellowship dissolved into factions pursuing conflicting interpretations of honor, most devastating was Arthur's relationship with Quai, whose marriage to the king represented Merlin's attempt to ground royal power in human love rather than abstract principle. The wizard had foreseen that Arthur's supernatural heritage would eventually isolate him from normal human connections, unless balanced by genuine emotional intimacy. But he had not anticipated how the queen's own humanity would make her vulnerable to desires that conflicted with her royal duties, creating the romantic triangle with Lancelot that would ultimately destroy Camelot's unity. Merlin's prophetic abilities allowed him to perceive the approaching catastrophe with perfect clarity, yet his cosmic perspective prevented him from feeling appropriate urgency about preventing it. To his expanded consciousness, Arthur's reign was merely one brief episode in Britain's eternal cycle of rise and decline. The wizard could see golden ages that would emerge centuries after Camelot's fall, technological marvels that would dwarf Arthur's achievements, and spiritual developments that would make the Round Table's idealism seem primitive by comparison. This temporal detachment created a fatal flaw in Merlin's character. He became so focused on long-term patterns that he lost touch with the immediate human costs of historical transition. His manipulation of events served abstract principles rather than protecting the individual lives that gave those principles meaning. The wizard who could reshape reality with a thought gradually lost the emotional investment necessary to care whether his intervention succeeded or failed. The manifestation of this spiritual crisis was Merlin's relationship with Nimue, the enchantress, who would become both his greatest student and his ultimate destroyer. She represented everything he had sacrificed in pursuit of cosmic wisdom, passion, spontaneity, connection to immediate experience rather than eternal patterns. Their relationship began as teacher-student mentorship, but evolved into something approaching mutual destruction as each sought to possess what the other represented. Nimue's hunger for magical knowledge matched Merlin's need for emotional anchor to human experience. She offered him the physical and spiritual intimacy he had abandoned in pursuit of transcendent wisdom, while he provided her with access to powers that could remake reality according to her desires. But their union was doomed by fundamental incompatibility. She existed fully within time, while he had learned to perceive existence from outside temporal sequence. The famous tale of Merlin's imprisonment in the Crystal Cave reflects not simple betrayal, but mutual recognition that their relationship had become spiritually toxic for both participants. Nimue used the wizard's own magical knowledge to create a binding that would contain his power while preserving his consciousness, effectively creating a supernatural library where his accumulated wisdom could be accessed without risking further damage from his cosmic detachment. But the deeper truth of Merlin's imprisonment suggests voluntary withdrawal rather than involuntary captivity. The wizard had grown weary of watching his interventions create suffering despite his benevolent intentions. Every attempt to guide human development toward higher ideals seemed to generate unintended consequences that caused more harm than the problems he sought to solve. His withdrawal into the Crystal Cave represented recognition that cosmic wisdom and political involvement were fundamentally incompatible. From his crystalline prison sanctuary, Merlin continues to influence British history through subtle interventions that respect human free will, while preventing absolute catastrophe. His consciousness exists simultaneously across all time periods, allowing him to coordinate events across centuries in service of patterns too complex for mortal understanding. The wizard who once served individual kings now serves the eternal principle of Britain itself, protecting the island's role as bridge between ancient wisdom and future possibility. The psychological implications of Merlin's legend extend far beyond historical curiosity into contemporary questions about the relationship between knowledge and wisdom, power and responsibility. His story warns about the dangers of intellectual development that proceeds without corresponding emotional and spiritual growth. The wizard's cosmic perspective, achieved through abandonment of human limitations, ultimately isolated him from the very humanity he sought to serve. Modern encounters with Merlin's influence often occur in liminal spaces where ancient and contemporary realities intersect. Researchers studying prehistoric monuments report experiences of expanded consciousness that provide sudden insight into complex problems. Scientists working on cutting-edge physics occasionally describe breakthrough moments that seem to involve direct transmission of knowledge from external sources. Artists and writers struggling with creative projects sometimes experience periods of supernatural inspiration followed by the production of works that exceed their normal abilities. These contemporary manifestations suggest that Merlin's consciousness continues to operate according to principles established in the original legends. His influence appears strongest during moments of transition, personal, cultural, or technological, when individuals or societies stand at crossroads that will determine their future development. The wizard's interventions take the form of sudden insights, synchronistic events, or technological breakthroughs that serve long-term human development while respecting the autonomy necessary for authentic growth. The environmental implications of Merlin's legend have gained new relevance as his warnings about the consequences of severing connections to natural forces prove increasingly prophetic. His magic drew power from understanding humanity's place within cosmic order, rather than attempting to dominate natural law through technological manipulation. The collapse of Camelot serves as metaphor for what happens when civilizations prioritize short-term control over long-term harmony with the natural systems that sustain all life. Climate change, viewed through the lens of Merlin's prophetic consciousness, represents not mere environmental crisis, but spiritual emergency indicating humanity's fundamental disconnection from the cosmic principles that govern planetary health. The wizard's withdrawal from direct intervention reflects recognition that technological solutions alone cannot address problems rooted in consciousness, that genuine sustainability requires spiritual transformation rather than merely improved engineering. The legend of Merlin's teaching methods offers guidance for contemporary educational and developmental approaches. His pedagogy emphasized experiential learning over abstract instruction, direct communion with natural forces over classroom theory, and development of wisdom rather than mere accumulation of information. The wizard understood that authentic knowledge emerges from synthesis of intellectual understanding with emotional maturity and spiritual insight. Modern practitioners of therapeutic and educational disciplines often invoke Merlin's example when working with individuals whose intellectual development has outpaced their emotional or spiritual growth. His story provides framework for understanding the dangers of premature empowerment situations where individuals gain access to knowledge or authority before developing the character necessary to use such power wisely. The crystal cave where Merlin dwells serves as metaphor for any state of consciousness that transcends normal temporal limitations while remaining connected to human concerns. Meditation masters, visionary artists, and innovative scientists sometimes achieve similar states where individual awareness expands to encompass patterns normally invisible to ordinary consciousness. These experiences provide glimpses of the cosmic perspective that Merlin attained permanently. Though usually without the emotional isolation that marked his final transformation, contemporary Arthurian enthusiasts often seek to locate Merlin's physical prison, exploring caves throughout Britain that might correspond to legendary descriptions. While no site has been definitively identified, many report profound experiences of expanded consciousness when visiting certain underground locations, particularly those associated with prehistoric ritual use. These encounters suggest that the cave serves not as literal prison, but as symbol for states of consciousness accessible to anyone willing to surrender individual ego in service of larger patterns. The prophecies attributed to Merlin continued to manifest in contemporary events, though usually in forms requiring sophisticated interpretation rather than literal fulfillment. His predictions about Britain's role in global affairs, the rise and fall of empires, and the eventual synthesis of material and spiritual knowledge find expression in current geopolitical developments, technological advances, and cultural movements that echo patterns established in his original visions. Tonight, as you consider your own relationship with knowledge and power, wisdom and responsibility, remember that Merlin's crystal cave exists wherever consciousness expands beyond individual limitations, while remaining connected to compassionate concern for human welfare. The last magician of Britain achieved cosmic perspective through sacrifice of human connection, demonstrating both the possibilities and dangers inherent in transcendent awareness. Listen for the whisper of ancient wisdom echoing through modern challenges. Feel the weight of knowledge that extends beyond personal experience into recognition of patterns that shape collective destiny. And remember that somewhere beneath the hills of Wales, in crystalline chambers that exist outside normal space, the greatest wizard who ever lived continues his eternal watch, serving as bridge between human aspiration and cosmic law. Guardian of wisdom too dangerous for casual possession, yet too necessary for complete abandonment. And so, our journey through the shadow-haunted landscapes of England draws to its close. But the echoes of these ancient tales continue to reverberate through the corridors of our modern consciousness, reminding us that beneath the veneer of technological civilization lie forces and truths that no amount of progress can fully eclipse. We have walked with spring-heeled Jack through the gaslit streets of Victorian London, where industrial confidence met supernatural chaos. We have cowed before black sharks, burning gaze in the marshlands of East Anglia, where cosmic justice prowls the boundaries between sacred and profane. We have witnessed Herne's eternal hunt through Windsor's ancient groves, where nature's guardians demand respect from those who would claim dominion over the wild. We have trembled at the lamp and worm's catastrophic hunger born from casual sacrilege against sacred waters. We have stood in awe before Mother Shipton's prophetic visions, where time itself bent to reveal humanity's approaching choices and their consequences. We have felt the heat of Wan's supernatural forge, where divine creativity meets mortal exploitation with results that echo through generations. And we have glimpsed Merlin's cosmic consciousness isolated in crystal chambers, where infinite knowledge carries the burden of infinite loneliness. What wisdom have we gleaned from these encounters with England's darker legends? That our ancestors understood truths about the relationship between human ambition and natural law that our technological civilization has forgotten at its peril. Each creature we have encountered serves as both terror and teacher, reflecting aspects of ourselves that we would prefer to ignore but cannot escape. Spring-Heeled Jack reminds us that progress without wisdom creates its own monsters. That the very technological advances we celebrate as triumphs over primitive fear can generate new forms of anxiety and alienation. His supernatural agility mocks our belief that human ingenuity has conquered all natural limitations, while his blue flames illuminate the spiritual emptiness that lurks beneath material prosperity. Black Shake teaches us that cosmic justice operates according to laws older and more fundamental than human legal systems. His burning gaze pierces through social pretense to judge souls by standards that recognize neither wealth nor position, only the weight of compassion carried in hearts that claim authority over others. Herne the Hunter embodies the return of natural forces that industrial civilization attempts to suppress, but can never fully control. His antler crown marks him as representative of powers that shaped Britain before humans arrived, and will continue shaping it long after human civilization has passed into memory. The Lambton Worm demonstrates how small acts of casual cruelty towards sacred things can grow into catastrophes that threaten entire communities. Its regenerative abilities mirror the way environmental problems tend to multiply when addressed through inadequate solutions that ignore root causes. Mother Shipton's prophecies reveal that the future is not empty possibility waiting to be shaped by human will, but destination. We approach through choices made in ignorance of their long-term consequences. Her visions serve as warning that some trajectories once begun become increasingly difficult to alter. Wan the Smith reminds us that authentic creativity cannot be separated from personal autonomy, that the greatest works emerge from inspiration rather than compulsion, from respect rather than exploitation. His terrible vengeance against those who would enslave divine forces serves as warning about the hidden costs of treating sacred powers as commodities to be owned and controlled. Merlin the Enchanter represents both the pinnacle of human wisdom and the ultimate limitation of transcendent knowledge, divorced from emotional connection. His withdrawal into crystal chambers reflects the paradox that cosmic perspective achieved through abandonment of human limitation can ultimately isolate us from the very humanity we seek to serve. These legends survive not because our ancestors were more superstitious than ourselves, but because they encoded truths about human nature and cosmic law that remain relevant regardless of technological advancement. They remind us that some boundaries should not be crossed, some forces should not be exploited, and some wisdom comes only to those humble enough to recognize their place within rather than above the natural order. In our current age of environmental crisis and technological disruption, these Gothic tales offer both warning and guidance. They warn that treating nature as commodity rather than sacred trust generates consequences that extend far beyond immediate calculation. They warn that progress without wisdom creates monsters more terrible than the ignorance it seeks to dispel. They warn that power without responsibility inevitably corrupts not just individuals, but entire civilizations. But they also offer guidance for those seeking to navigate the treacherous passage between ancient wisdom and contemporary necessity. They teach that authentic power serves justice rather than personal ambition. They teach that genuine knowledge includes emotional and spiritual development rather than mere intellectual accumulation. They teach that lasting solutions emerge from understanding our place within larger patterns rather than attempting to dominate forces beyond our comprehension. These legends also remind us that England itself is more than geographical territory or political entity. It is repository of accumulated memory, sacred landscape where countless generations have left their mark on both physical terrain and collective consciousness. The moors and marshlands, The ancient forests and prehistoric monuments that serve as settings for these tales continue to hold power for those sensitive enough to perceive it. Modern visitors to these legendary sites often report experiences that echo the original supernatural encounters. Whether these phenomena represent actual supernatural activity or psychological projection matters less than their continuing ability to transform consciousness and inspire recognition of forces larger than individual experience. The psychological truth of these legends lies not in their literal accuracy, but in their symbolic power to connect us with aspects of reality that rational materialism tends to ignore or deny. They serve as bridges between conscious and unconscious mind, between individual experience and archetypal pattern, between human ambition and cosmic law. If these dark tales have sparked recognition of wisdom encoded in England's most ancient stories, if they have opened your awareness to forces that continue operating beneath the surface of modern life, then subscribe to our channel and join the Ravenhurst community. Share these stories with those who understand that sometimes truth comes dressed as legend, that sometimes the most important insights are transmitted through tales of creatures that should not exist. Leave a comment telling us which of these English legends spoke to you most deeply, which shadows will follow you into tonight's dreams. And remember that in subscribing to this channel, you become part of an ancient tradition. Keepers of stories that must not be forgotten. Guardians of wisdom that emerges from confrontation with the darker aspects of human nature and cosmic reality. The legends we have explored tonight continue to evolve, adapting to contemporary circumstances while retaining their essential power to challenge comfortable assumptions about progress, rationality, and human dominion over natural forces. Spring-Hill Jack bounds through urban landscapes transformed by global capitalism. Black Shark prowls territories threatened by climate change. Hern hunts through forests fragmented by development. The lampworm stirs in waters poisoned by industrial excess. Mother Shipton's prophecies manifest in technologies she foresaw centuries before their invention. One's forge burns wherever creative spirits resist exploitation. A Merlin watches from his crystal cave as humanity approaches crossroads he perceived long ago. These ancient guardians remind us that some truths transcend historical period. Some patterns repeat across centuries, and some choices echo through generations in ways that immediate consequence cannot reveal. They teach that authentic wisdom emerges not from domination of natural forces, but from understanding our place within the larger patterns that govern all existence. Until we meet again in the candlelit chambers of Gothic imagination, may your nights be filled with productive terrors and your dreams haunted by truths too profound for daylight contemplation. The darkness holds many secrets yet to be unveiled, and Mr. Ravenhurst will be your faithful guide through whatever shadows await. Sleep well, dear listeners, and remember that the best monsters are always the ones that show us something true about ourselves. For in the end, these ancient legends survive because they serve as mirrors reflecting not just the fears of past generations, but the eternal struggles that define human consciousness. The tension between ambition and humility, progress and wisdom, individual desire and cosmic law. The mists of England will always conceal mysteries that rational thought cannot fully illuminate. The Standing Stones will always remember rituals conducted when magic and reality were one, and the old gods will always wait patiently for those brave enough to acknowledge that some powers transcend human understanding while remaining accessible to those who approach them with proper respect and recognition. Remember, the greatest legends are those that transform us in the telling, that leave us changed rather than merely entertained. For in the Gothic traditions of England lies wisdom earned through centuries of grappling with forces that shape human destiny from realms beyond ordinary perception. These are not mere stories, but transmissions from ancestors who understood that survival requires not just physical adaptation but spiritual evolution. The recognition that we are part of something far larger and more mysterious than individual experience can encompass. The England that gave birth to these legends continues to exist beneath the surface of modern life, waiting for those with eyes to see and hearts to understand that some truths can only be transmitted through tales of terror, that some wisdom emerges only when we dare to look directly into the shadows that surround all human pretense to knowledge and control.